I've kind of focused my attention on like global supply chains, agriculture,
Yep.
and just like sort of local grassroots movements. But there's so much more out there to know about. So yeah, in general, I still take that attitude of like open curiosity and also admitting when I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't have the expertise to say, because I think a lot of people, you know, you're thought of as an expert in something. And so can you give an opinion about this other thing? Like, oh no, I'm not going to sound silly. It just sounds silly if I try to pretend I have an opinion on that, or I'll learn something later on and go back and be like, my opinion was so wrong. I should have just said I don't know.
Right. And but I think that that's like a practice of like intellectual humility. And obviously, if you want to really get down to it, if you want to break around all the politics and et cetera, like what really the scientific method is trying to do, or you know, trying to get into it, and just like Bayesian reasoning, you know, really of just like, hey, let's keep taking more information, let's keep applying it. And then I think one of the things that you have been lauded about, and Twitter, we'll get about like how Twitter can be used as an influence a little bit later on, but Joe Norman has talked a lot about, you know, theory into practice. And I think that's one of the things that you've been especially, or at least I've been tuned in and primed to since he said that. And I've been really kind of trying to even translate that into me. And like, because I'm very philosophical, I'm very thought oriented, very meta, but then at the same time, I think I share a lot of the things with you. You know, my mother is from the hills of Tennessee. You know, she didn't have running water till she was 16 years old. You know, that was 1972, you know, right. So it's like, yeah, that's not that long ago, you know. So it's like I have a visceral history, you know, with coal mining and, you know, all those kinds of like things, and the opioid crisis. So like I get the practice oriented on the other side of like expertise and stuff. So I guess maybe let's just riff on that subject a little bit about theory to practice. And then you even said a little bit of your, maybe not naivety, but every young person, when they see some passionate people, they get passionate. You know, it's almost like a kind of feed off. So maybe talk about how, you know, your own journey coming from more that passion of theory into like, okay, well, how does that exactly translate into practice? And then not just practice, but like when you fail, because a lot of people just stop there at the practice. They try one practice and then it doesn't work. And then it's game over and we're done and everything sucks. And it's like, well, you're only like halfway there, really, you know, at that point, you know? And so it's like, let's just riff on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I love Joe. Joe and I have shared so much a similar worldview. It's been so nice to meet, you know, a lot of the people on Twitter. You feel like, these are my people. But yeah, it's interesting. I think that the theory and practice thing, now that we just started talking about this earlier on, like it really does mirror the sort of like academic versus non-academic, working class, local is whatever group, because I think in general, the theory people are like, you know, the highest form of anything is just reasoning and thinking your way through things, and like thinking the right thing or using your big galaxy brain to solve problems. And then the practical people, I'm thinking of somebody like Scratchy Johnson, who I love. He's so grounded in reality in a way that I really admire and wish to be someday. That he's like asking just super, super simple practical questions when somebody comes up with like this high level theoretical idea that's just so obviously not ground tested, you know? And so
in the field, you know,
in the field. And this is my whole thing about like, I came to this conclusion via academia, where I talked about this moment I had in an environmental sociology class, talking about how scientists were studying these salmon populations, and the ones who made a computer model in comparison to the ones who went out and counted the fish, the computer model people were like so off relative to the people who counted the fish. And I was just like light bulb moment. Yes, of course, counting the fish would be better. Like just go out into the world and count the fish if you want to know what's going on. Like sometimes you can't do that, but you know what I mean? In general, we should be tending toward like, you know, understanding the world as close to the world as possible, which then sets me on a pathway to really love and appreciate the people who are doing that all the time. And a lot of the people who are doing that all the time are like mechanics and carpenters and plumbers and home builders. And this is like, I've really gravitated towards a lot of people who do things with their hands because, you know, they're sort of the best systems thinkers out there. They're the ones who are like, know that it's trial and error, and which is more or less how the scientific method is supposed to work. It's supposed to be like you throw something out in the world is messy, either it comes back, your hypothesis is correct or incorrect, and like they're constantly testing their hypothesis, whereas people who are just in their head reading papers based on for example global aggregate data, which loses a lot in the midst of what it's trying to describe, because aggregating data at that level is so disconnected from what the way data is collected on the ground and like what it's describing. And obviously the people who collect that data and aggregate it have to make value judgments all along the line as to what is this describing, what are my assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. All that stuff doesn't really go into the final paper. What comes out is something like, land use change over time. And then, you don't really know what all the assumptions are underneath there. And then you get this huge disconnect between, for example, people who do regenerative agriculture and have done it for many generations in like the UK, for example, being demonized when, because these people who look at aggregate global data and are all theory are saying like, this for sure should not exist. You need to go away. My global aggregate data says so.
And we put so much emphasis on data that like that alone is now like king of the cat. It's like the creme de la creme. Same along with like peer review studies.
Exactly. And then imagine like getting a peasant coming in there and being like, look, I'm building soil, I've got biodiversity, I'm sequestering carbon, my water table's better. I don't have any flooding on my land. Like I have, my land is cooler than everyone else's around me because I have, agroforestry practices, all this stuff. And it's like the qualitative, that just can't really be captured in the same way as this quantitative stuff, which people who love theory worship. And so then it just becomes this sort of like battle of classes then, because the class people who love the aggregate data are the ones in power more or less, and the ones who are the ones out doing the practical stuff on the ground are not. And so now I've sort of turned to advocate for these practical people to the extent that I have any privilege at all. I try to use it to say like, let's take a look at these people who like know these things and do these things and have something to teach us.